It's been a year since Metallica released their 11th studio album, 72 Seasons, and it actually did not age the way I expected it would. First of all, yes, I simply cannot believe it, but it's already been a year since Metallica took us on a journey through the first 18 years of a human life, and I don't know, it almost feels like it was yesterday that I was sitting in that cinema at the capital of a country at war where we were able to organize that screening, watching the band talk about their new record. But already there, I was really wondering how much my perception of the record will change over time, as at least to me, it was one of those albums which for some weird reason you could immediately start nodding along to. On one hand, without really being overly excited about any of the songs right away, but at the same time thoroughly enjoying the experience from its first listen. And we all know that those are the type of albums that you generally like, but rarely go back to later on. Now, the first weeks of re-listening to 72 Seasons felt great. Despite what many said, the vast majority of Metallica diehard fans felt like it was a great addition to the band's catalog, with some even placing it in the same category as the band's earliest material. But then the honeymoon was over, and that's when you usually truly understand how the record will stand the test of time and whether it will remain in your top of favorite albums in the band's catalog. Now, I have to point out that I'm actually one of those weird guys who tends to go back to the albums of his favorite band and re-listen to them mostly in its entirety. Even when it comes to Ride the Lightning, which those who are not new to the channel might know is my absolute favorite Metallica record, which I've had on repeat for years when I was a teenager, and absolutely every song from which I actually consider to be a masterpiece. Yes, James Hetfield, I'm really sorry about that, but even Escape.
Don't say it. Don't say it out loud, please.
And so even when it comes to Ride the Lightning, even though I love every song from it, I realized that I actually only re-listened to it from the very beginning until the very end. And here is the first and rather weird thing that I've noticed about 72 Seasons. Since it first came out a year ago, and after that initial honeymoon of ours, I did not go back and re-listen to it in its entirety even once this year.
What?
And yet still somehow my streaming platform actually tells me that it is in the top of my most listened to records of this year. Upon its release, one of the most surprising things for many Metallica fans was how leveled 72 Seasons was. It is one of those albums which, if you kinda like a couple of songs from it, then you most likely enjoy the entirety of the record. And many, including myself, could not really name their favorite track from it, actually making 72 Seasons possibly the first Metallica album without a truly standout single. As when it comes to, for example, even Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I, for example, could easily name my absolute favorite track from it. Spit Out the Bone. And by the way, yes, I said it once and I'll say it again. I still think that Spit Out the Bone is one of the best songs Metallica have written in years. And even more, I believe that if it would have come out in the 1980s during the golden era of this band, many would still be screaming about how, oh, back then they really knew how to write real thrash metal. And it would have instantly become one of the classic Metallica songs along such tracks as Master of Puppets. But anyways, going back to 72 Seasons, unlike with most metal albums, to my surprise, I found myself mostly re-listening to specific songs from it, which suit my personal mood at that given period of time. And those songs have been constantly changing for me in the past year. For example, although I kinda liked it, at first I found Inamorata being unnecessarily lengthy, as if Metallica purposefully tried to drag it to release the longest track in their catalog and their fans to have something to talk about. But then at some point I became obsessed with it and listened to it gazillion times over a course of a month. And interestingly enough, such thing happened with most of the tracks from this album in the past 12 months. And here's the thing, prior to making this episode, I actually conducted a couple of different posts on other social media platforms asking the Metallica fans how their perception of 72 Seasons has changed in a year and which is their favorite track of this record today, a year later. And just like a year ago, with a slight exception of Lux Æterna, which I, as a huge fan of new wave of British heavy metal, can absolutely agree with, the distribution of the fans' favorite tracks from this album was almost even among all of them, which shows that 72 Seasons is not really the album of hits, but rather a record which is full of songs which may hit a spot for you as a listener, each by itself, depending on your personal mood and your personal place in life at that moment. Which I guess means that this is the album which actually lives up to its title. Another thing about 72 Seasons is that because, as I said before, although it doesn't have obvious favorites, it is a very consistent album, and therefore I personally never skip any of the tracks from it whenever a streaming platform suggests those to me. Yeah, it almost feels like Metallica wrote it specifically with the current music listening patterns in mind. And one of the biggest criticisms for some of the fans was the length of the songs on this record, which I guess being a huge Iron Maiden fan I don't really have a right to complain about at all, although I do understand where they come from. But I guess listening to the songs from 72 Seasons in such a way eradicates that flaw even for those whom it bothered the most. Because as I still firmly believe, just as I did a year ago, the songwriting itself on this record is actually pretty awesome. By the way guys, here I just wanted to point out that only around 30% of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the Metal Pilgrim channel. So if for some reason you still haven't done so, and especially if this is not the first video you're watching on this channel, I would really appreciate if you would consider doing it right now. Let's continue building this amazing heavy metal community together.
We're gonna have a good time. Always.
After the release of 72 Seasons, Metallica embarked on possibly the most unusual world tour in their career, playing 2 nights in every city they visit with 2 absolutely different setlists. And although together with their appearance at the Power Trip Festival last year they only played 29 shows in 2023, 8 out of 12 songs from the new record have already been performed live by the band, which is the best result in terms of diversity in the band's entire catalog since their debut Kill 'Em All, which somewhat proves our previous point, with the overall count of 84 times a 72 Seasons song has been played in front of a live crowd. And in case you're wondering, this is roughly 2 times more than the songs from Saint Anger have been performed live when that album came out. Yet at the same time, 2 times less than Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct tracks were heard on average by the fans at each of the concerts in support of those albums. But the most interesting thing is to see how those songs have been met by Metallica fans, and from the videos we can see online, all of them, and especially the more straightforward bangers like Lux Æterna and the old school Too Far Gone, sound incredible live, which makes me hope that in 2024 Metallica will try to include more of those in their setlist, as I think most Metallica fans would not mind it at all if the band would play more than just 3 songs a night from their newest studio output. As for most of us metalheads, it is the live shows where you develop a true connection with the new music by your favorite artists. By the way guys, Metallica was actually one of the last bands that I've seen live before the big war in Ukraine started. I flew out from Kiev to San Francisco for the Metallica 40th anniversary weekend, and it's actually those memories, among the others of course, which still help me keep going through everything that is going on in my country. So here as always, I just wanted to thank you all for the amazing support you're showing to me, this show in Ukraine through this incredibly difficult time. And some of you might know that I had the tickets for the 2022 show in Madrid, which I sadly couldn't go to. And I actually have the tickets for the 2024 concert in Spain as well, which sadly it looks like I'm missing once again. And all because of one mad dictator's ambitions and his insane army of orcs. So guys, thank you all, and please continue supporting us in any way you personally can, and especially when the news about Ukraine are not really on the news anymore. But anyways, preparing for this episode, I actually went out of the way and broke my 72 Seasons listening pattern and re-listened to this album in its entirety once again. And guess what? I absolutely enjoyed it, possibly even more so than upon my first listen of this album a year ago. No, I still don't think it is among the very best Metallica outputs of their career, but to me it is exactly what I expected and wanted to hear from the band today, given everything Metallica has been through as a band and all the baggage the boys have being a 40-something-year-old band. And I know that for many diehard thrash metal fans, the so-called real Metallica ended with a Black Album, but one of the things I personally love about this band is the diversity of their music, with every of their albums being relevant for you at some point in your life. And a weird thing is that Metallica is actually the only out of the big four bands which I feel that way about. I absolutely hate the experiments the others did, as I guess they were the only ones who were able to go into the different specters of metal sound and still feel comfortable in it, making music that would still sound undeniably Metallica-like. And I feel like 72 Seasons is in a way a summary of that journey, as despite not being close to what they did in the 80s, which of course is still my personal favorite era of Metallica, it showcases the different sides of their music, which you may find yourself hooked on depending on which Metallica era you are a fan of, and where you stand in your personal journey. And so I believe that going to the future, 72 Seasons might not be one of those albums that you place among Metallica's absolute best, because first of all, let's be honest here, at this point in their career, when Metallica is literally the biggest band on the planet, and that status of course has been received thanks to the band's earliest output, and given the fact that Metallica today is one of those bands that everyone seems to love to hate, no matter what they would have put out at this point, it would never be able to match Master of Puppets or Injustice for All, partially because of the prejudice many of the fans have towards any new material by this band. But nevertheless, while it might not be considered one of the greatest albums by the Metallica fanbase, it still will be an album which any of the songs from will be met with extreme enthusiasm by the fans at a live show, and B will be the album which, once you decide to re-listen to it later on, and will actually be open to look past its imperfections, which of course it has, you might suddenly find yourself being absolutely hooked on it. It would be somewhat of a 21st century reload, which I'm still not ashamed to admit I absolutely love. And while it is not one of those records which I go back to on a regular basis, when I do, I thoroughly enjoy every track from it, and I'm always, without any exceptions, I'm excited to hear either of the songs from this album live. So yes, I'm really excited to see how the fans' perception of 72 Seasons will continue changing and evolving through time. And after re-listening to it in its entirety, I simply know that I will be going back to it way more often and enjoying it as a whole from now on. But anyways, what do you guys personally think about 72 Seasons today, and how has your perception of this album changed so far? Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching the short video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!